Will Australia have a US-style inflation crisis? Woolies and CSL have market-moving news, but is it in the right direction? And my EFO is out on Thursday. Will it excite or scare the market? I'm Peter Switzer, he's Paul Rickard, and we're mad about money. Well, Paul, a lot of people are worried about inflation. I'm not, but what are you thinking, Paul?
Well, certainly the number overnight in the US, Peter, is a little bit of a cause for concern. That's, of course, the wholesale prices. I think Australia's a different situation, Peter, but, the market's going to be a little bit on nerve about inflation. I think this is going to play out over some months. So we're going to see some swings, ups and downs as the inflation bogey comes out. But you're in the camp, it's not an issue. So I don't know whether that's positive, Pete, or you've been getting into that Christmas Beano or whatever you're doing out there. But let's wait and see how it plays out.
Yeah, I will get more optimistic the more Christmas Beano, whatever that is, I get into. But one interesting thing is, Paul, in the AFR today, they actually talked about whether Australia would have a US-style inflation crisis. And the interesting thing is, when you look at the comparison, like the US has 6.8% inflation, we have 3%. Also, I've always believed because they came out of the crisis quicker with all those vaccination rates, the demand in the US really spiked at a time when the supply chain problem was probably at its worst. Now, things are getting better, but I've got to say, I did pick up a story this morning from CNBC, where one guy says this supply chain microchip problem could be around the 2023. Now, if that's the case, maybe I'm being a little bit too optimistic, but certainly Jo Masters from Ernst & Young, she thinks that we will have a lower inflation problem, and that's the most important thing. I don't want to see Australia with a big inflation problem. I want to see it maybe peak around maybe April, May, and start dissipating over time. I think that'll happen in the US as well. A lot of economists agree with me, but I want to put one thing out. Our inflation of 3% had a 45% increase in childcare costs. Now, that was because it was free, and then all of a sudden they started charging again after lockdown. Petrol was up 24%, tobacco 9.8%, and motor vehicles up 6.2%. Some things actually fell. And one interesting one, Paul, is that women's garments fell, the prices fell by 10.4%. And that's got to be the women buying online in particular.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting segue, Peter, also into Woolworths news yesterday. And I think what Woolworths yesterday came out and said their costs are going to be higher because of COVID, but they're not raising prices to recover the extra costs. And I think that goes back into your inflation argument. I think companies are scared to increase prices, Peter. So I think I'm probably with you. Inflation is not an issue yet, but certainly the market is going to be watching it very carefully.
Yeah. And what I think is also interesting, Paul, is that, you made the point, a lot of businesses don't have the same pricing power because, if say, for example, Woolworths wants to charge a pretty big figure, say, for a coffee machine, well, someone could go online and probably buy it from a US or from Amazon at a lower price. Amazon is probably having a very big inflation effect worldwide.
Yeah, and that's the disruptive effect of new technologies, Peter. And that's one of the things people forget about. It's all good and well pointing to commodity prices going up, but what we forget is that there's a whole revolution going on. It's all digital, and that's lowering the cost of delivery and supply and new business models and just competition. And that's, I think, probably been the biggest single downward force on inflation over the last decade. And that's just accelerating at the moment. So I think for you and I, who don't think inflation is a problem, we're basically saying that sort of power of new technology, disruption, digitization, that's going to keep a lid on prices because companies are scared to increase prices because of the competitive issues.
That's right. And the same even goes for labour. If wages start going up at a faster rate than businesses can tolerate, when they can't raise prices, they will look overseas to see whether something can be done by some external contractor in a cheaper labour market. And I think all that means that inflation is not going to be the kind of big issue we saw in the 80s and early 90s. Let's go to the next one, Paul. CSL. There's going to be by the way, on the Woolworths thing, do you think it's going to be a good thing for Woolworths or a bad thing in terms of will people see it as a buying opportunity or will they dump Woolworths?
I think probably the market's reaction yesterday tells you they saw it as a buying opportunity, Pete, because it came back, it was down about 10%, finished down about 7%. It has been going up. It was almost at its all-time high earlier in the week. So we've got to put that in context. But I think in that $37, $38 mark, it's seen as a very safe stock. People are still looking for safety out there. And I think that's one of the reasons, just before we go into CSL, Peter, that Telstra's doing so well. It hit a new high yesterday as well. So let's not discount what's going on there, which is just, I'd describe as a pretty rock solid and a rock solid stock for 2022.
Yeah, and by the way, history actually shows that when inflation is on the rise, staple type stocks do pretty well. And Woolworths is clearly a staple kind of consumer good, isn't it?
It is. And talking about CSL, I think that's the big news, Peter, because look, this purchase of the Swiss company V4 Pharma, look, now gives CSL a big foothold in the kidney and the renal disease market. I learned a new word, Peter, what is nephrology means, and of course that's a word I didn't know, but that's the medical term for the study of the kidney and all the diseases that go with that. Interesting part about it is that CSL sees that as being a market that's currently, a total addressable market of about $13 billion US, growing to $25 billion by 2026. So they say there's double-digit growth in that market as the population ages and more people learn that obesity is a big issue, and all the things that causes with kidneys and dialysis and treatments and so forth. That's why they're going into it. So I hope the market's going to like the story. Post the acquisition, it's interesting to know what does CSL look like. About 70% of the revenue will still come out of a traditional Behring business. That, of course, is the blood plasma business.
Yep.
The new kidney business with V4 will account for about 16%, and the influenza business under Seqirus will be about 14%. So that's what the new CSL looks like. They're raising about $6.3 billion on the market today from institutions. It's going to be a minimum price of $270. My sense that's going to go pretty well. We'll find out at about 4 o'clock, hopefully after the market closes, at the price that goes at, and that'll basically set the direction for what happens to the CSL share price when it trades back on market. If that is really well supported at a price close to where the shares closed the other day, CSL will go a lot higher. The only disappointing part about the whole thing, of course, is poor old retail shareholders, Peter. They've been left out to a certain extent because if you're a big shareholder, you're going to be diluted by this. There is a share purchase plan, which is nice, but again, that's not really on a pro rata basis. And you and I will get a chance to buy more CSL, but only up to $30,000 worth at the same price or a lower price than what the institutions pay, but we won't be doing that till February. So that's a good part, but of course, you've got to remember the trouble when the companies raise money on this basis is poor old retail shareholders actually get left out and are actually being diluted by the way that they do these placements.
Yeah, it's a pity, but CSL is a damn good company, and it probably will benefit from this better diversification over time. But in the short term, yeah, the retail investor will be screwed. Okay, let's go to the final.
Well, just bottom line, I suspect this will be over $300 sometime later this week. So I think this will be really well supported. It's a big raising, but I think the market's going to like the rationale for CSL.
Yeah, for sure. The final one, MyEFO, the Treasurer comes out, tells us how the budget's going and whatever. I interviewed him earlier this week, as you know, Paul. He's pretty confident. He's liking the look of 2022. Of course, he doesn't know what Omicron's going to do, and Omicron could actually slow down the recovery, but that recovery will come a bit later if Omicron's a problem, but it will come.
Yeah, look, it will, Peter. And of course, I guess they're building up to a position. We've got an electoral cycle, election in May. May the 7th is the favoured date, but the 14th and 21st are also quite prominent. But it follows, again, I guess, a budget sometime in April or late March, Peter, when we get tax cuts or we get something like that coming out, being rolled out. So they want to be in a good fiscal position. So I guess the MyEFO as the start of that process about conditioning the electors for a bit of a handout from government going into the electoral cycle.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for an election, I don't think we'd be hearing about tax cuts. But the one thing I will say that Josh made the point, the budget will be late March for sure. So it'll be around it gives them time to curry favour with the voters before the election in May. Paul, thanks for joining us, mate. I'm Peter Switzer, Paul Rickard, and we're mad about money.